I didn't plan to fall for the man who wore my brother's varsity hoodie and fixed our crooked cabinet with a wink. But rent climbed, boxes piled, and suddenly my brother's best friend was carrying plants into my apartment and asking where I liked the morning sun. This is how a practical roommate arrangement turned into a home, how a habit became a promise, and how courage arrives in moments, coffee, keys, and tenderness you can't unlearn once you've lived it. If heartfelt, real-life stories make your day, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support lets us keep creating gentle stories. I'll be honest, I didn't see it coming. Not when he lifted the headboard with one hand and balanced my grandmother's waffle iron in the other. Not when he laughed with his entire body at the way the elevator squealed. Not even when he paused in the doorway with a roll of blue painter's tape and said, "You want the bed on this wall or that one? I'll mark both and we'll decide once we can breathe." There's a certain rhythm to moving that makes strangers into teammates. You share a dolly, cuss at the stairwell, learn each other's shoe sizes in the line of scuffs across hardwood. By noon, the sun found its way through the southeast window and drew a bright square across the floor. We stood in it, the two of us, and I had the thought that sometimes life places you in the light without asking first. I said, "This place has good bones." He nodded and said, "So do you." It was the kind of throwaway line people use to keep the afternoon moving. It still landed. My brother, Ethan, had brokered the whole thing with the authority of the eldest child who still knows where the spare batteries are. "Noah," he said over steak tacos the week before, "you're burning cash on month-to-month rent. Caleb's lease is up. He needs a roommate. You're tidy, he's tidy. You both like weekend projects and hate clutter. It's a match made in Home Depot." I'd laughed because it was easier than admitting the nerves that crept up my spine when he said Caleb's name. Caleb, the friend who spent Friday nights at our house in high school, who stayed late to do dishes with my mom like it was a privilege, who learned the creak of our back step and never let the screen door slam. There's a softness to the way memory holds certain people. You turn the page and there they are again, still wearing the same frayed cap, still offering you a hand up onto the porch when your arms are full. "Ground rules," Ethan said, tapping the table like a judge with a gavel made of napkins. "Bills split evenly. Kitchen stays sanitary. And I don't date your best friend," I said, rolling my eyes because my mouth knew the script even if my heart wanted a different one. Ethan did that thing he does. The half smile that says, "I love you more than I love being right." Exactly. We're grown-ups now. I trust you both. Still, I've seen the movies. I nodded because it made him relax. But the truth is, I hadn't been in any danger. Not then. I was tired, out of practice with romance, and tender in the places people can't see. I wanted a roommate, not a revolution. I wanted mornings that smelled like coffee and evenings where you could hear the neighbor's radio and feel like you weren't missing anything. I wanted steady more than I wanted sparks. Caleb showed up on move-in day with a cooler full of sandwiches and a thermos of sweet tea the way my Aunt Dee makes it, which turned out to be sweet enough to make you forgive the world its rough edges. He set the cooler on the counter, wiped his hands on his jeans, and surveyed the living room like a carpenter measuring twice. "We'll have you sleeping in a real bed before midnight," he said, as if midnight were a finish line and we were already across it. We put the couch against the widest wall because the wall told us to. We argued for 10 minutes about where to put the record player until he said, "What if we put it on the low shelf here so the sound warms the floor?" And I realized I would probably agree to anything if he said it in that easy, confident way. I hung my mother's watercolor of peonies and he stepped back, making a frame with his hands. "Level," he declared, and it felt like a blessing. We wrote our names on a whiteboard by the front door and made a plan for who was buying toilet paper and who was in charge of the ferns. He printed labels for the pantry without being asked, dotted I's like a person who has nothing to prove. He reached up to tape a list of house repairs we'll ask about, and I watched the muscles in his forearm move beneath his skin. And I looked away because noticing a body you've known for years has a way of startling you. That first night, once Ethan had left with a backslap for Caleb and a hug for me that lasted just a fraction longer than usual, the apartment felt like a church after everyone has gone home. Quiet. Holy in a way made not by stained glass, but by intention. We ate sandwiches sitting on the floor. The city hummed outside our windows. He asked me what time I usually woke up. I said 9 if I can help it. He said 5:30 because that's when the sky learns to breathe. I told him he could have the morning. I'd take the late-night shift. We parted to our rooms with the kind of awkward good-night two grown men exchange when they have no idea where to put their hands. The next day, he fixed the squeak in the cabinet door with a dab of paraffin and a patience my father would have envied. He showed me the magic of a plastic shim. I showed him where the light switches hide in old Portland apartments. We settled into something steady fast, like our lives were two rivers that figured out how to braid without making it a production. He did the breakfast dishes while I sent resumes. He ran down by the river and laundered the towels like he'd trained for both. I came home from the part-time shift at the nonprofit with stories about a donor who insisted her cat was a better judge of character than most people, and he listened like it mattered. He hummed without knowing he was humming, tuneless, contented. He left little kindnesses in his wake, a tea bag on the saucer because I like mine strong, a post-it that said, "You've got this," stuck to the mirror the morning of an interview. He had a knack for fixing what was loose and oiling what was stuck. Once I found him with a tiny brush painting fresh numbers on our mailbox, tongue between his teeth in concentration, as if our address were something that deserved to be legible to the whole street. We made rules that made sense. Shoes by the door but not on the mat. Friday was make something night. Could be soup, could be a bookshelf, could be the kind of joke that needs more time to land. Sunday morning belonged to pancakes. The second Saturday of the month was for yard sales. Not because we needed anything, but because the hope of finding a teapot with a story is reason enough. We were not a couple. We were two people living kindly beside each other. That distinction took up a lot of space in my head. It's easy to make sense of your life if you talk around the things that scare you. "He's my brother's best friend," I told people when they asked how it was going. "He's handy," I added. "I've never had a sink so balanced. We share a calendar." All of that was true, and none of it was the truth that kept my breath shallow sometimes in the quiet after midnight, when I could hear him turn in his bed and the city paused in that way it does when trains are between whistles. My small, fierce brother, who had held my secret when I had been too young to trust it, was happy for us in the way people are when they think they understand the situation. He'd come by and see us circle each other in the kitchen, a cup passed, a drawer closed with a hip, hands not touching and touching anyway in the way small lives do. He'd say, "Look at you two," and I'd shrug and say, "He alphabetized the spice rack." Ethan beamed like a man who has managed to corral the chaos into something beautiful. I kept the rest folded inside my chest. 3 months in, the car went. Not a dramatic explosion, not a movie-style smoke signal, just a cough and a refusal. I sat in the driver's seat with my forehead against the wheel, counting backwards from 10, trying not to think about how many different kinds of failing a person can do in a week. There was a tap on the window, and then he was there, hands in pockets, eyes taking me in the way they do. First the situation, then the person inside it. "Bus?" he asked, which was to say, "It's okay to need help." "Bus," I said, which was to say, "Thank you for not making this bigger." We rode the 14 downtown, his knee warm against mine. He pointed out a mural I'd never noticed, and made a joke about how Portland collects small coffee shops the way some people collect stamps. He did not talk about the car. He did not mention money. He held the pole with one hand and a strap with the other and made steady look so easy it felt like a skill I could practice. The next morning, he had 2 travel mugs on the counter and bus passes by the keys. "Until we figure it out," he said, "we." It's impossible to fall in love on a bus without telling yourself you're not falling in love on a bus. I told myself I was noticing the way his wrist looked in morning light, the way he offered his seat to an older man, and then stood in a way that didn't make a show of it. I told myself I was grateful, not dizzy. I told myself I could tell the difference. Some days that was true. I went on a date with a kind man named Marcus, because doing something sensible felt like putting on a good coat when the wind picked up. Marcus liked maps and movies where nothing blew up. He asked about my parents and let me answer slowly. He had a way of listening that made you feel like you were telling him a secret, even if you were just describing your favorite cereal. After our 3rd dinner, he took my hand across the table and smiled with a sadness that was not about him. "You're not here," he said. He was right. I apologized. He shook his head. "Don't be sorry for being honest," he said. He texted me a photo of the sunrise the next morning with a simple, "For you." I saved it. I didn't tell Caleb about Marcus right away. Not because it was a secret, but because nights with Caleb had a way of filling up with enough small talk to feed a life. We argued about whether colanders should live in the bottom drawer or hang on the wall like art. We made soup on a Wednesday with the windows open so the steam turned our kitchen into a fog that smelled like thyme. He showed me how to wrap a sprig with kitchen twine so the leaves don't go rogue. I showed him the one playlist that could get me through writer's block. It felt like picking up a long conversation after a brief interruption, even though the truth was we had never really been talking before this. He got sick first. I didn't know what to do with how fast worry can move from your head to your hands. He waved me off at the start, stubborn and flushed, but he is a man who, when told to rest, will attempt to do the dishes from the couch with a sponge on a stick. So I fussed. I learned how to make the tea his aunt swears by. I figured out the exact angle to place a fan so a person can sleep without waking dry-throated. I put a cold cloth on his forehead and he made a joke about being an old-timey patient. Underneath the humor, he let me take care of him. There is a humility to accepting help that looks, from the outside, like courage. Then it was my turn. Week-long fever. Dreams that felt like they required a translator. A cough that made conversation feel like a mountain. He sat by my bed like a lighthouse, tracking my breath. He read the dosage instructions 3 times for the same medicine because he wanted to be sure. He learned exactly which radio station plays the good old standards after midnight and left it on low so the dark felt less empty. When the fever broke, he looked like he'd been holding his breath for days. "Hey," he said, voice soft enough to not startle me. "You scared me." I tucked his hand into mine the way you'd tuck a blanket around a sleeping child. "You can let go now," I said, and he laughed like I'd told the funniest joke in a quiet library. Weather came in waves that winter, the kind that makes the city sound smaller. Power went out one Wednesday evening because that's what power does in old buildings at the exact hour you've preheated the oven for sweet potatoes. We lit the emergency candles like acolytes and sat on the kitchen floor because the floor felt like the sensible place to be. In the shadowed light, everything looked like it belonged to an older story. He told me about the time he first came to our house, about how my mother had set a plate in front of him like he was royalty and said, "Eat, you're too tall to be this thin." We laughed. And then the laughter thinned, leaving room for a question. "If we weren't us," he said, thumb tracing the seam of his jeans. "If our roles weren't what they are, do you think this would be easier?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe we'd find another way to make a mess. Humans are creative like that." It was meant to be light. It was not. He stared at the candle flame as if it had an answer. "I don't want to hurt Ethan," he said, "or you. I don't want to be a problem anyone has to manage." "You aren't a problem," I said. It was the only true sentence in a field full of sentences that wanted to be true. The power blinked back on like a referee stepping onto the court. We stood up and went back to being careful. Careful works until it doesn't. Spring nudged open the door and the neighborhood stretched. We found excuses to stand outside. We adopted the habit of drinking coffee on the stoop, passing a newspaper back and forth, solving one crossword together every Sunday. He waved to Mrs. Palmer every morning like he had been doing it for years, and she started leaving us scones in a paper bag on our doormat with a note that said, "Eat while warm," like that was an order we wouldn't argue with. He fixed her sticky window for free and refused to take anything except a hug in return. He came home smelling like lemon pledge and a kind of happiness I'd like bottled. In May, my nonprofit held a fundraiser in the gym of a church with a stage that had seen 100 talent shows. We strung lights, set up long tables, and played music that made anyone over 40 smile. He came to help without being asked, moving tables with easy strength, and later, when a slow song played, he reached for my hand like it was the only move available. "Just once," he said, and pulled me into the corner of the gym where the light pooled gentle. We swayed, 2 men in nice shirts pretending to be less in love than we were, and somewhere in the second minute, my chest stopped arguing with me. We were careful in public, but we weren't invisible. People see what they're ready to see. Our friend from the art council grinned and gave us a thumbs up like she'd been waiting to do it for months. Ethan came by the apartment on a Tuesday with takeout and a familiar grin you'd recognize in any family photo. He handed Caleb the bag like a baton, squeezed my shoulder, and said, "I have 20 minutes before a call. Feed me fast." We set the food out and ate like we were on a timer, laughing with our mouths full, the kind of eating you can only do with someone who remembers what your allergies are. As he was leaving, he lingered at the door. "You two good?" he asked, seeming to include more in the question than he ever had. "Yeah," Caleb said. Simple, respectful, 2 letters that held so much. Ethan looked at me and the look said, "We are not children anymore. Tell me if I need to get out of the way." I nodded. He nodded back. "Okay then," he said, like a pastor closing a service, and clapped Caleb on the back in a way that made them both laugh. I thought the earth would shake when something finally changed. It didn't. It was a Tuesday night like any other when Caleb set his keys on the table and sat down with the kind of seriousness you reserve for bank loans and confessions. "Can we talk?" he asked, and I pulled out a chair and braced for the kind of conversation that makes you a little taller afterward. "I've been drawing up plans for a while," he said, sliding a folded paper across. "Not for a house. For us." The paper was a sketch of a wall shelf, the sort you'd put by a door. 2 hooks, then 3, then 5. He pointed as he spoke. "We moved in with 2 sets of keys," he said. "Then we added a spare for your dad when he visits. Then one for Mrs. Palmer because we promised to feed her cat if she ever goes to visit her sister again. I want to build something that assumes we'll keep making room." I didn't realize I was crying until the paper blurred. He reached into his bag and set a small cloth pouch on the table. Inside was a single brass key on a red ribbon. Not to our apartment. To the future, if that doesn't sound too grand for a Tuesday. The teeth were uncut, an invitation more than an object. He held it between his fingers, a little nervous, a lot sure. "I don't have a speech," he said. "I just know that every time the world has knocked me off balance, I've looked up and there you were, making soup, making room, making bad jokes about colanders. I love you, Noah. I want to stretch our lives around that truth. Would you build this with me? The shelf, the life. Will you be my husband? There are moments in a life when saying yes is the only honest thing. I could have made it complicated, brought up money and timing and the myth of perfect readiness. Instead, I looked at his hands. I looked at our kitchen with the stove that won't stop ticking after you turn it off. With the coat hung on the back of a chair because that's where real coats live. With the plant that refuses to die because we've learned how to pay attention to what it needs. This was not a fantasy. This was better. "Yes," I said. It felt like a door opening in a field. He exhaled like he'd been waiting beneath a wave and had found air. He leaned in and kissed me in the way people do when they're ready to stop making everything so hard. We told Ethan over breakfast at a diner that has been frying eggs for 70 years. He sat in the booth like a man preparing for news and then softened when he saw our faces. "Okay," he said after the basics were out. What we were doing, when, how. He stirred his coffee. "You know, when I made that old rule, it was because I wanted to protect you both. From gossip, from heartache, from my own fear of losing my spot in the lineup." He looked at Caleb then, eyes steady. "I never wanted to be the reason you didn't choose joy." His hand found mine across the table. "I love you, little brother. I love you," he said to Caleb, and we all pretended we didn't hear the shake in his voice. The server slid pancakes in front of us like she'd brought a solution. We laughed at ourselves for being sentimental in public, and then let ourselves be sentimental in public anyway. "Can I still threaten you?" Ethan asked Caleb, wiping his eyes with his napkin and regaining his swagger. "In a loving way?" "Please," Caleb said. "It'll keep me honest." "You hurt my brother," Ethan began, then leaned in with a crooked grin. "And I will make you rake my entire yard with a salad fork." Caleb saluted. "Yes, sir." We planned something small because small fits in a life the way big sometimes doesn't. Not because we don't like grand, but because intimacy is easier to hold. We asked our neighbor Mr. Benson, who once wore a clerical collar and now wears flour on his shirt as often as not, if he'd stand with us while we promised things that everyone promises and a few promises only we could make. He cried before he answered, which we took as a yes. We chose a Saturday in June and cleaned the apartment like we had invited the mayor. Mrs. Palmer took charge of flowers and, in a move that surprised no one, insisted on making deviled eggs, the way my mother did, with pickle and pride. We built the shelf together 2 nights before, sanded it smooth, stained it the color of walnut, and drilled 3 hooks instead of 2 because Hope likes company. We hung it by the door, level because of course it was, and stood back like we were admiring a painting. The 3rd hook waited, an empty seat at our table. Ethan showed up early with a cooler and a folding table that had seen decades of Little League snacks. My dad arrived with his favorite folding chair and a carton of blueberries, because he never learned to show up without bringing something. He hugged me the way fathers hug sons when their sons finally show them who they are, and it scares them and saves them at the same time. He pulled Caleb into a quick embrace that said, "Welcome, and also, I will be watching you." It was perfect. We didn't do tuxes. We did the best of what we already owned. Pressed shirts, clean shoes, courage. We stood under the maple behind the building just inside the fence and let the day be what it was, breezy and polite. Friends gathered close. The music came from an old speaker that crackled like a radio in a kitchen. Mr. Benson cleared his throat and said, "I'm not here to marry you. You already did that when you started leaving soup on each other's nightstands. I'm here to name what's true." He looked at us, proud and teary. "Do you promise to keep the small promises even when the big promises feel heavy? To let each other be wrong sometimes with dignity? To carry groceries and worries with equal care?" We said we do and meant it. We promised to tell each other if there was spinach in teeth before a meeting. We promised to try the other person's show at least once before declaring it unwatchable. We promised to take turns being the brave one and to always order extra fries because it is easier to share abundance than regret. When it came time to exchange something, we handed each other keys on matching cords, brass, cut to the shape of our current home, and we laughed at the simplicity of it and then swallowed hard, because nothing had ever felt more right. The keys were not a lock to something. They were a way in. We threw a party that felt like a neighborhood. There was lemonade and pie and a playlist that made people dance with their elbows. Ethan made a toast that managed to include 2 stories from high school. One joke about salad forks and the sentence, "I've never been this happy to be proven wrong." People hugged us like they wanted to keep a piece of the day on their shirts. The keys chimed softly against our chests when we moved, a music I didn't know I needed. After everyone left and the string lights hung tired and proud, we went inside and looked at our home as if it had shifted a little, as if the walls had stretched to accommodate the vows. The shelf by the door held our 2 sets of keys and the extra we'd meant to get cut for Mr. Benson. The 3rd hook looked at me like it knew something I didn't. We didn't lose ourselves in the days that followed. We found the parts we hadn't been able to see alone. He still woke before the sun, lacing up his shoes with the care of a person who knows the value of routine. I still wrote cover letters and budgets, and on good mornings, a paragraph that felt like a step toward something with teeth. We learned how to fight without breaking anything. It took longer than either of us will brag about. The first time it was over towels, colors versus whites, hot versus cold. The kind of argument that would be funny if you weren't so sure you were right. We raised our voices, then lowered them, and then both laughed mid-sentence, the way a person does when they remember the other person is not the enemy. We had pasta on the porch and apologized right there between bites. We got better at it over time. Not perfect. Just better. I got the full-time job by August. The kind you want to tell strangers about because you're so relieved to have it. Building after-school programs in 3 neighborhoods where the basketball courts needed nets and the kids needed a place to be loud and safe. I came home that day breathing like I'd run a race. He stood up from the couch so fast he knocked his knee on the coffee table and didn't even yelp because he was too busy whooping for me. He scooped me up like I weighed less than I do and spun me once in the living room like we were in a black and white movie, and the neighbor across the alley shouted, "Woot!" because apparently joy travels. We took a weekend to visit my father in the small town where every 3rd person knows our last name. Caleb changed a porch light bulb without being asked. He listened to my dad's stories like they were new, even when I could recite them verbatim. On Sunday, my father pulled me into the garage under the pretense of showing me the new tool pegboard, then stood me by the workbench where he had written 1,000 notes on the backs of receipts and said, simply, "You look settled." He meant it as a blessing. I took it as one. The city kept being a city. Sirens at night, blossoms on trees you forget the names of, construction that always seemed to move 2 blocks ahead of wherever you needed to go. We kept being us. On our first anniversary of Yes, we put an extra hook on the shelf without saying why. "It looks right," he said. It did. We started keeping a dish by the door for other small things, a button, a found marble, a folded paper fortune that reads, "A simple thing will bring happiness." It had been right, and would keep being right. There were hard days. He hurt his back helping a neighbor move a dresser because he is, at base, a generous idiot with a soft spot for mid-century furniture. He pretended it didn't hurt and then winced reaching for the cereal. I made a nest of pillows on the couch and read to him from an old mystery novel until he fell asleep with his mouth open. One hand flopped over his face like a child. There were days I came home from work spent because the needs were bigger than the hours, and he turned down the lights and plated leftovers like he was feeding me dignity. We learned the art of asking, "Do you want solutions or snacks?" The answer is almost always snacks first. Holidays arrived with the peculiar weight of expectation and memory. Thanksgiving at Ethan's, where football played in the background like a hymn we hummed out of respect. Christmas with my father, who put tinsel on the tree even though it made the vacuum mad in January. New Year's back home, just us on the couch, making a list of things we wanted to keep and a list of things we were ready to let go. We let go of the idea that love proves itself in grand gestures, kept the habit of washing dishes together with sleeves rolled up and hips bumping in a choreography no one taught us. Sometimes, late at night, he showed me pieces of himself he doesn't show anyone. The way he misses his grandmother most when he's making cornbread because she taught him to listen for the right sizzle. The way fluorescent lights make him uneasy because they hum like a tone he can't hear but can feel. The way he prays in his own way by running in the morning, by stacking wood neatly, by remembering birthdays. I told him about the time in 7th grade when I lied about wanting to be an architect because it sounded impressive, when all I really wanted was to make sentences that felt like a roof. He didn't laugh. He kissed my shoulder like the admission had made me braver. We didn't need permission after a while, but we accepted it when it came. People who loved us learned to say so in ways that suited them. Ethan would shoot me a text after he hung up from talking to Caleb. "He's in a good mood. Don't let him cook unsupervised." My father, practical to the bone, started saying "we" when he meant me. "We should oil the deck," he'd say, and the "we" brought me to tears alone in the car twice before I told anyone. On our street, the kids started knowing our names, shouting, "Hey, Caleb!" and Noah, like we were part of the landscape you can count on. We were there for each other's small emergencies. A lost package, a ride to the clinic, a pot of chili when the heat went out for someone 2 floors down. Once, we came home to find a bouquet of grocery store sunflowers on our front step with a note that read, "Thanks for being good neighbors." We stuck the note in the edge of the shelf and the flowers in a jar when the landlord offered us the apartment next door at a discount because the tenant was moving, and he'd rather rent to someone he knew. We said no. We liked our crooked thresholds. We liked the way the morning sun found the southeast window. We liked the history we'd made inside these specific walls. We added a throw blanket and an extra stool by the counter and laughed about how we were nesting, like birds who planned to stay a very long time. We went to City Hall on a mild day with 2 friends as witnesses and the good pen. You hold for signatures that matter. We signed our names without hurry, and the clerk congratulated us with a sweetness that felt like relatives. We walked out into sunlight that didn't know anything had changed, and yet everything had. We got lunch at the diner that keeps the coffee hot and the air forgiving. We held hands under the table like teenagers. Not because anyone would have minded if we didn't hide it, but because sometimes being tender still feels like a secret you want to savor. After, we came home, hung our keys on the hooks, and stood in the doorway like we'd arrived in a new country without crossing any borders. The shelf looked like a line drawn straight through our days. We put our names above our hooks on tiny magnets because adulthood is a chance to rediscover label makers. We put the City Hall document in a frame that Caleb made out of leftover trim and hung it beside the watercolor peonies. And the room felt like a conversation between past and present that finally included us. We keep a list now, on the inside of the cabinet door where only we see it. Things we vow that are not just for one day under a maple tree. When we're tired, we will be gentle. When something breaks, we will decide together whether to fix it or bless it and let it go. When we are at a party and the other person looks lost, we will find them. We will celebrate on Tuesdays because life is too big to save everything for the weekend. You'd be surprised how far such a list can carry you when the afternoon goes sideways. I still think about the first morning he was there, coffee in his hand, pointing out where the couch should go. I think about the bus rides and the slow dances in unlabeled corners of rooms. I think about how the apartment has learned the rhythm of us. The thud of his shoes by the door, the clink of the spoon against the side of my mug, the laugh that arrives at the exact moment a story needs it. I think about how we used to be good at being careful and how we got better at being brave. People sometimes ask for the moment, the one where it all changed. As if love is a switch. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's a lamp on a dimmer that you turn up a notch every day until the room is bright and you don't know when it happened, only that it did. For us, it was mornings and shelves and the way he says my name when he's calling from the other room and wants to hand me a peach that is exactly at the point where it's ready to be eaten. For us, it was an extra hook by the door we put up because it looked right. Long before we knew why. This is what I know now. When you get the chance to build a life with someone who makes the ordinary gentler and the difficult possible, you say yes. You learn their coffee order. You memorize their tells, the way he rubs his left eyebrow when he's thinking, the way I smooth the tablecloth when I'm trying to be brave. You carry groceries and stories and the kind of silence that feels like home. You keep keys on a hook by the door not because you fear losing them, but because having a place to put things you need is an act of hope. Every once in a while, usually at the end of a long day when the light has gone soft and the world remembers to be quiet, I stand in the hallway and gaze at that little shelf. The keys glint. The tiny magnet with my name sits crooked because he bumped it and never fixed it. The watercolor peonies keep blooming. I breathe and think about how far a person can travel without moving very much at all. Then I turn off the hall light and walk back to the living room, where he is, inevitably, doing something practical in a way that makes it lovely, rewinding the measuring tape, folding a towel with the corners lined up, placing a plate on the table like it's a small ceremony we've earned. He looks up. I look down. We meet halfway like we always have, and the day, no matter what sort of day it was, ends with the one fact that makes all the others easier. We are here together, at home.